Go ahead, Priscilla. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Lisa mentioned, my name is Priscilla Andrews. I am the Director of Clinical Services and Programs here at the center, and I'm really thrilled that so many of you have chosen to join me for this presentation today. It is a topic near and dear to my heart, as Lisa mentioned, because I feel passionately that when we can understand and understand the context of what's happening for us, especially when it is something that, we come pre-wired with, I think it can decrease a layer of stress when we're already in a situation that is stressful. The number of times I've had somebody come into my office and at some point say, I think I'm going crazy, or I'm worried I'm nuts, or something, as they're responding to something. Um, and my response has been like, nope, sounds like you're human. And this is something that you've kind of been pre-programmed to experience. Doesn't necessarily mean there's not need to manage what's going on, find coping strategies, not necessarily means that the distress all of a sudden dissipates just because we understand. However, the awareness of what's going on does give us a path forward to help manage some of the stress that we're under and the distress that that stress may be causing. So I am going to keep my chat open in case people have a question along the way that is to clarify something that I've shared. So if there's something that I share that there is kind of misunderstanding around, please feel free to throw that up in the chat. My hope is to leave 10 minutes at the end to open up the room. As Lisa noted, we'll take the recording off so people can either ask those questions or make those comments in the chat, or even come off mute and share that with the group that's present here today. So what are we going to be talking about today? So, generally, if we look at all of this together, it really is about, can you leave here today? My hope today is that you're going to leave here with a better understanding of how your nervous system really helps dictate the response patterns that you have when you're when you're in a stressful situation, and to better understand how that nervous system translates to the thoughts and feelings, the behaviors, the impact on your relationships that you may find. And more specifically, to talk about a specific part of the nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, that really does a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to our stress response. So now, what is stress? I realized as I was putting this presentation together, it's helpful for us all to be on the same page, because I think that we often talk about stress as, wow, this is stressful, or the stress being something external to us, when stress is really a bodily response to demand, change, or threat. Stressors are the things that cause us to experience stress. And what stress really is, I want to kind of introduce this reframe, is that stress is our nervous system responding in a way to try to keep us safe when the demands of our environment have in that moment outweighed the homeostatic resources that we have, right? Like if we're at rest, we may need more resources to meet the demands of a change or a threat. And our stress response is our nervous system trying to do just that, to respond when we need more internal resources. Because our nervous system is always asking, always, right now, right? You're listening to my voice, you're looking at the images on your screen, maybe you're hearing noise in your home, you're listening to the tone of my voice, maybe you see things going on around you, and all of that is being analyzed basically by a deep part of our nervous system to determine, am I safe right now? Right? Our nervous system is always trying to determine, are the cues of safety outweighing the cues of danger? And I make that distinction because the cues of safety, it does not have to be 100%, right? It just is, are the scales tipped in favor of this is safe enough, right? So, and that'll come into play a little bit later into the presentation, but to just really take away the notion that we all come pre-wired with the same system, and that system helps our nervous system learn what is safe and what is danger. And the experiences that we have across our lifespan, starting from when we're an infant, start to get stored and shape what gets filed in that file drawer is safe or dangerous, right? So highly charged situations, traumas shape how our system reacts to the world and whether or not we experience the world as full of threats or are able to recognize cues of safety, right? And that's an important thing to keep in mind because if early on we experience a lot of trauma or we're in routinely in highly charged situations, our nervous system is pre-designed to respond in kind and to start perceive threat, to be vigilant for signs of threat and keep us in that state of hypervigilance. Okay, so planting the seed to think about what experience you may have had across your lifespan that may have primed your nervous system to do what it was designed to do, which is to stay alert, to keep you safe. Now, stress isn't just danger, okay? Stress response isn't just about an actual danger in front of us, right? It's not just a response because there's a lion in front of us, right? It's not responding just because there's somebody in front of us that wants to um, rob us, right? There's all these other ways that our body responds with a stress response, right? And if you think about some of these circumstances that can prompt us to have a stress response, you can start to think about how endemic to the cancer experience these particular list of circumstances are, right? Waiting for scans, not knowing if treatment's working, having ambiguous symptoms, trying to absorb lots of information, new terms, make decisions in a short time frame, figuring out how am I going to disclose my diagnosis, maybe feeling pressure to stay positive, dealing with changes, changing roles, maybe thinking for yourself, I should be handling this better, right? I should be trying to be strong, coping with changes in a sense of independence and control, right? These are all things that come along with a cancer diagnosis. And even though they're not in immediate danger, our nervous system is going to experience those in the same way that it experiences cues of danger. Now, the other thing too is that good events can also cause positive stress. We call it eustress, EUSTRESS, right? So things like starting a treatment that offers hope, finishing treatment, receiving good news, maybe feeling supported from others, but that support feeling particularly overwhelming, right? So many stressful moments are dangerous. They may be uncertain, they may be meaningful, they may be overwhelming. And our nervous system responds to anything that feels important, that feels uncertain, or requires additional energy with a stress response, not just things that are actually dangerous in the moment. Now I'm going to throw out my first poll here. We'll see how this new format goes. So you'll see that QR code in the upper left corner. And if you take your phone out and you open the camera, if you hold it over that QR code on your screen, at the bottom of the photo area, you'll see a little QR code that pops up. And you'll just want to click that QR code and you'll get the poll on your actual phone so you can select an answer, right? So really thinking about when it comes to when you're first stressed out, what is maybe that first sign that you notice that says, I think I've something's going on here, right? I see those thoughts are racing, right? And notice that as people are adding, right, there is this variation here. I think that body awareness, feeling tense or activated, I see A lot of you in the room can really relate to that. Um, Also want to acknowledge, sometimes we're delayed processors. Maybe we don't recognize right away that we're under stress. And I think some of what I talk about later on about the autonomic nervous system is going to provide you some new context to understand that more, because numb is also a stress response. Not feeling anything in a situation where maybe we would expect to feel something, or maybe other people are expecting us to feel something and we don't. That is also one of the states that we can go into when we are responding with a stress response. So I know I didn't get everybody's response here, but gonna move on here because nobody's getting tested. But I mean, I think what I'll say here is nobody that responded was alone in their response here, right? So to just normalize how you may respond personally to response, even if maybe your pattern of what you notice first doesn't maybe mirror everybody in your life, right? We're all going to have kind of a different way, a little bit tweaked way of how we respond. Um, okay, so stress shows up in many forms, and you could see that in that other slide, right? We may have feel tense in our body. We could feel our heart racing, shortness of breath. Maybe we feel irritable. Maybe we feel anxious, angry, sad, right? Maybe our thoughts are racing, or maybe our thoughts are just blank. Maybe we have a thought on repeat that we can't shake. Maybe we can't sit still. Maybe we can't move. You can see how some things on the opposite ends of the spectrum are both normal, common responses to have when our body is having a stress response. And it's normal for us to have signs of stress in all of these categories. Maybe one shows up more predominantly than the other, or we're more attuned to one over the other. However, we're all going to have kind of our own little I think of it as like the tuners that we would have on a stereo before that had all those knobs, and you'd get that like pattern when you were like, am I listening to classical versus rock? We all have our own little equalizer pattern of what shows up the most for us, what shows up the soonest, what shows up latest, right? In some combination in all four of these categories. So let's just go over a bit of like nervous system 101. And I want to say this is probably the densest part of the presentation. You do not need to remember all of this to walk away with something from this presentation. I sort of am like, I find the neuroscience interesting. And I think, just think about this part of just broad strokes. You're going to get the presentation if you're like, I didn't catch what Priscilla said. This is just to kind of orient you to the nervous system as a whole, okay? Because we've two parts of the nervous system. We've got our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spinal cord. And then we have our peripheral nervous system, which is all of those nerves branching off of the spinal cord, right? And you can see here, right, some of those first things that we learn about what does our brain do for us, right, is our sense of our five senses that really help us start to interact with our environment, right? And we can think about how we take for granted those five senses, but what are those five senses saying? Our body, our brain is constantly taking in information from our environment and trying to understand it and make sense of it and organize it. So just some brain basics, okay? You see here, there's lots of different areas of our brain, and the different parts of our brain play different roles. It's amazing how far we've come as far as our understanding of the brain, and also how much there still is to learn, right? I recently went to a talk with Michael Pollan, who wrote a book about consciousness. And one of the prevailing themes was, the more we try to understand consciousness, even though we all are experiencing it, the less we understand consciousness. It's just such a complex, our brain is such a complex, I don't know, organ, part of our body. But these different parts of our brain play different roles, right? So we've got our prefrontal cortex. That's really our higher level thinking, right? That's the part where logic resides. Our like executive functioning resides. And that's going to come into play because when we are in a stress response, this is not in the driver's seat. A deeper part of our brain, kind of what sometimes gets referred to as our reptilian brain, is what is what is directing how we're experiencing the world, how our body's responding, what our thought patterns are, right? If you've ever had the experience of, my doctor told me that the scan was good, or the doctor told me she thinks that the treatment is going well. And then what got added on was, but I can't stop worrying about the symptom, or what if it's not working? And I know my doctor and I trust my doctor and I saw my test results, but right, what is that telling me? All that's telling me is this is not in the driver's seat, something else. There's another biological process going on right now. We've also got our pituitary gland that regulates our hormones, which like regulates our bodily functions through the release of hormones. Our brainstem is responsible for those basic survival functions. So the functions that occur without thinking, heart rate, breathing, right? What happens when we're sleeping, digestion. And then we have a part of our brain referred to as our limbic system. And our limbic system, I'm going to put them all up here, plays an important role in emotions, particularly those that evolved early and which play an important role in survival, right? Remember how I said our nervous system starts learning from birth, right? I think of it as this ginormous file cabinet where it stores those early experiences and it codes them of safe or danger, right? And so we have our amygdala, which plays an important role in fight or flight. It stores highly charged emotional experiences. Notice that it's also associated with memory, right? And specifically, it is associated with forming new memories related to fear. When stimulated, when your amygdala is stimulated, it can cause intense emotions. The hypothalamus is involved with hormone regulation and release, and regulation of things like thirst and hunger and mood, right? So the parts of our brains work together here, right? Even though there's these different structures. And then our hippocampus is responsible for episodic memories. Okay? So like the idea of remembering kind of something that took place in a discrete period of time. And the hippocampus files those away into long-term storage. Okay. Now, the peripheral nervous system, right? This is responsible for communication between the central nervous system, aka the brain, and other parts of the body. So it sends information back and forth. Now, here's something that I think is really powerful to keep in mind. 20% of your nerves about 20% of your nerves send information from your brain to your body. 80% of your nerves send info from your body to your brain. So think about the balance of that. Think about how much information your body is sending to your brain to help you make sense of what's going on, right? And so when we think about it in that frame, we can think about how powerful body sensations are and how powerful when we are having a stress response and it causes that cascade of bodily sensations, how it can create a feedback loop if we don't try to interrupt it, right? If my heart is racing, it's going to send a message up to my brain that Priscilla must be in danger. And so it's going to say, keep it going, right? Which makes sense, right? If I'm being chased by a lion, let's say, I can't stop and do deep breathing. I got to like figure out what I'm going to do, right? And this kind of gives sort of hints at like why relaxation techniques are so powerful, is because what it does is it settles that response in our body so that our body can send more accurate information up to our brain about whether we're safe or in danger. Okay, so all of this becomes more relevant when we look at a particular part of the system that runs automatically, and that's our autonomic nervous system. And thinking about our autonomic nervous system is a part of our nervous system. Like, we're not making conscious decisions about this part of our nervous system. We can bring how our autonomic nervous system responds into conscious awareness, right? But we are responding when we become aware of the process, we are responding to something that's already happened. The difference is when we bring awareness into play, are we aware of that within a few minutes, or are we aware of that in a few hours or a few days or a few weeks, right? I've certainly had the experience where I have been in an extended stress response, and it's only been after I've been like floating in it and crashed that I'm like, oh, that was actually going on for quite a while. And I wasn't bringing discernment and awareness to the table to recognize that that was what was going on. Because I'm human too. So what is our autonomic nervous system is two parts. There's a sympathetic nervous system and a parasympathetic nervous system. And I will say what we used to think of and what we're going to get into here is kind of a changing, evolved paradigm. Some of you may remember back in like high school biology, learning about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, and it being kind of like this on-off switch, right? My sympathetic nervous system, if it gets turned on, then that's fight or flight. And if my parasympathetic nervous system is on, that means I'm at rest and I'm in homeostasis. And what we've discovered over the last several decades is like it's much more nuanced than that. Sympathetic nervous system has non-reactive rules. What do I mean by non-reactive? I mean non-stress reactive, right? When the cues of safety outweigh the cues of danger, our nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system is still doing important things for our functioning, right? It's regulating our breathing. We've probably all been doing that, but not been thinking about it. I just took a breath, so I brought some conscious awareness to that. It's regulating our heart rhythm, right? But then it also responds to cues of danger, and it prepares us to act. And so when we are in a reactive response pattern with our sympathetic nervous system activated, you can see some of those signs of stress that you guys may identify with. Right? The racing thoughts, irritability, maybe you find yourself overworking, I can't sit still. I wish I had the like sympathetic nervous system response that when I was stressed out, I cleaned my house. Apparently that just skipped my family line. But really, the sympathetic nervous system is telling us do something. Why is it safe to do something? Do something because you're in danger and try to figure out how to get as safe as possible, right? That's when the sympathetic nervous system is in a reactive state. Now, we have a parasympathetic nervous system. Remember how I said the old way of thinking about it was that, if the parasympathetic nervous system was activated, that just always meant that we were in this state of calm, of homeostasis, where things were sort of at rest and functioning at their optimal level. But what we have discovered over the last several decades, and this is via work done by a researcher, his name's Stephen Porges, Porges. You will get my PowerPoint, by the way, so you don't have to write everything down on my slides. But if you're interested in more beyond this, Stephen Porges developed something called the polyvagal theory. And to just acknowledge right at this point that this is really where what I'm presenting is born out of, is what the polyvagal theory has to teach us about our parasympathetic nervous system, and in general, our autonomic nervous system, okay? So there's two pathways. And I should say, just Stephen Porges, his research was actually looking at infants in the NICU and trying to understand why their heart rate was decelerating when they were under stress, because the traditional way of understanding how the nervous system responds to stress is that their heart rate should have been racing. And instead of racing, it was decelerating. And so like, why was it doing that? How do we understand it? We know these infants are under stress. And it was really looking more closely at the parasympathetic nervous system, and in particular, the vagus nerve, which travels from the brain stem downward to the lungs, heart, and diaphragm, and stomach, and also upward to the nerves in our neck and our throat and our eyes and our ears, right? It's a really long, you can see this is an image of the vagus nerve, right? And that PVI stands for Polyvagal Institute. So thank you to them for this beautiful image. But you can see it's this nerve with lots of different branches. And so one thing that we know from polyvagal theory is the ventral vagal pathway, which is the one that goes upward, is what is activated when we are in a state of safety. And what I mean by activating is it is running the show. And when our ventral vagal pathway is sort of dictating our response pattern in our nervous system, it allows our system to work in harmony, right? It also, when we are in that state of safety, it turns on what's referred to as our social engagement system. What does that mean? That means we can connect with others, we can receive support, we can provide support, right? And we need to be in a state of safety for that to be clicked on. How many of you have found that despite your desire to connect with your close other, to feel comforted by your spouse or partner or friend or child or coworker or whatever, that there are times when you are stressed out where like you can see this part of your brain can see them reaching for you and you are like, ugh! It is not working. It is not connecting, right? But that's because biologically, when we are not in a state of safety, that part of our brain kind of gets clicked off so that our resources can go to trying to get to safety. So what are some of the things that are hallmarks of being in a state where our ventral vagal pathway is running the show, right? Connection, curiosity, being flexible, right? We can have difficult emotions, but we don't stay mired in them, right? We can express we're worried about something, but it doesn't feel like it gets claws in us. We feel grounded. Right? I should say ventral vagal, like being in that state is not necessarily mean we're like, and we're all like relaxed and like about to fall asleep, right? Joy, happiness, excitement, right? Those are also ventral vagal experiences as well. It's not that we have no energy in our system. It's that the energy is being well regulated and we have just enough energy, right? It's being in a state where it's like I can do what I need to do and I feel good about it. Now, there's that other pathway, right? I mentioned there's the pathway that goes downward, down to our abdomen, our lungs, all of that. That's the dorsal vagal pathway. And remember earlier when I said numb is a stress response, right? If you relate to numb as a common response pattern when you are under stress, right? That means likely your dorsal vagal pathway is the one running the show. Now, non-reactively, right? It does have plays important role in digestion, right? So think about like parasympathetic nervous system, our dorsal vagal pathway, it's not good or bad. And even having the stress responses, right? That is our nervous system designed to try to take care of us when what has been perceived is that there's something dangerous going on, right? So it's not like, oh, dorsal vagal bad, or even dorsal vagal being in a reactive state bad. It's how do I understand that that's my pattern, and do I get to have a choice of whether I stay there longer than I need to be there? So dorsal vagal, it responds to cues of extreme danger, right? At some point, if we're in a situation and we cannot get out of it, our dorsal vagal pathway is going to take over. I will also add, though, that based on experiences that we may have had when we were young. Our nervous system may have been trained to learn that the safest thing to do, even in the immediacy of a danger, is to activate the dorsal vagal pathway, right? If you think about, and I don't want to give too specific examples, because if some of you in the room have experienced certain things, like it could be very triggering, a cue of danger for me to even be talking about it. But if you think about, that children can go through experiences where they can't run away and they can't fight back. And so how do we learn to keep ourselves safe? How does our brain get trained to keep us, our nervous system get trained to keep us safe in those situations? And the dorsal vagal pathway is what comes online in those scenarios. It's actually the oldest part of our autonomic nervous system, which I'll get into in a few moments. So it's this protective state of collapse, right? It is the turtle pulling its arms and legs and head in, or its head and legs in. Do turtles have arms? I don't know. Every time I say that, I'm like, are we talking arms and legs or just legs? The four things that it walks around on, it pulls it, right? It's shutting down, it's numbness, it's zoning out, right? I'm here, but I'm not really here. I'm guessing some of us at some point in our lives, self included, have experienced being in a situation where you were physically present, but you were miles away, right? That's your dorsal vagal pathway. Now, let's talk about, now we kind of understand, here's these components, right? So what exactly does our nervous system do? And in particular, autonomic nervous system, what are the functions and the way that it functions that come into play that are really going to dictate how we experience the world, right? First important thing is what our autonomic nervous system does is it does something called neuroception. And neuroception being distinguished from perception. Perception is conscious. Neuroception happens in a deeper part of our brain that has a faster response time than our conscious brain. And I'm talking like milliseconds, right? That it is enough that, something that an example I like to give is like, if you've ever like walked in somewhere and you've kind of gotten the heebie-jeebies, like the hairs on the back of your neck stood up, and like there's nothing going on in that room that would have dictated you getting the heebie-jeebies, right? That's likely a neuroceptive process, like something in the environment cued, uh-oh, right? I always say your uh-oh button got pushed, right? But right now, right, that neuroceptive process is taking in information. Am I safe? Am I in danger? Am I safe? Am I in danger? It's outside of conscious awareness. So wanting to determine how safe is this? How dangerous is this? Am I under threat? And it responds to cues in three primary realms. Inside our bodies, remember that 80% of those nerves, right? Outside in the environment around us, and also in our relationships, right? Think about the people that as soon as you're around them, oh, you just feel good. I can think of my friend that does that. And then you can think about those people that like, as soon as you're in the same space, you're like inside, like, oh, brother, here we go again. They don't even have to say anything, right? Or think about you're talking to somebody, talking, and all of a sudden their tone of voice changes, right? Tone of voice is very powerful. Tone of voice tells us a lot about understanding safe danger. So as I mentioned, right, your body responds before conscious awareness. You can see some examples here, things that I already even mentioned, right? Feeling tense, just walking into a room, right? Phone, startle response after the phone rings. I had a client once who had an elderly parent that was ill for an extended period of time. It took years after their parent died to not jump when the phone rang because they were so cued, right? And I don't need to necessarily ask how many of you got your diagnosis over the phone. How many of you saw the hospital pop up on the screen and picked up the phone and the nurse navigator said, are you driving? Can you pull your car over? Right? You're primed. You're primed. The phone is danger now. Doesn't matter if it's your spouse, your best friend, your grandkid, your kid, right? Somebody telling you you won the lottery. Um, it gets connected because it's an intense experience. Remember that part of our brain, that limbic system, stores those intense experiences. And we need that. We need our brain to store the intense experiences or we wouldn't survive. These are all survival instincts. Right? Oh, here we go. All right. Second poll. It's actually a word cloud. So what you're going to be invited to do is to type words in about things that help your nervous system feel safe. Um, I invite you to type one word in. You can type multiple words. You can type a word, enter, type a word, enter. Just curious to think about, what are the things that make you feel like things are going to be okay or are okay enough. Because remember, we don't need there to be no cues of danger. Quiet, assurance, faith, beautiful. Deep breathing, yeah. As people are, faith is a popular one. Sunshine, good thing we've got a beautiful day here today, right? I can look out my office window. Um, I will say like pets are amazing source of comfort and regulation. I'll be talking about that in a moment. Um, you know, for many of us who may have experienced trauma at a young age, humans are unreliable, right? Some of us may have been in situations where the very person we were supposed to turn to for safety was actually pretty dangerous, like literally dangerous physically, emotionally. And so if we've experienced something like that, animals can be a much more reliable source of comfort and regulation. And even under the best of circumstances, humans are complicated. Relationships are complicated. I could put my husband in the comfort column or the stress column very easily. It just depends on what day you're talking to me, right? When he texts me and says we need $7,000 of sewer work, I can tell you he was not in the comfort column. Right? So it's people are complex. Um, Beautiful. Chocolate. I like that, right? Some things give us pleasure, right? Okay. Thank you, everybody. So I mentioned regulation, and I want to fine tune that to say co-regulation. And there's this famous psychologist, her name was Sue Johnson. She's one of my theoretical I wouldn't say mentors because I never met her, but like idols feels a little too on a pedestal, but she developed a form of therapy called emotionally focused therapy. And it's really based on how important our relationship with others is. And I think part of the reason emotionally focused therapy appealed to me was because it really emphasized how important co-regulation is. So what is this? We are not just Homo sapiens, we are Homo vinculum. It means we're not just humans, we're humans who need to connect with others. Barbara Streisand got it right, right? People who need people. Am I butchering the lyrics? But you get me. I'm going to get to a point in about probably 10 years, I'm going to say Barbara Streisand, and half the audience is going to put in the meeting chat, who's Barbara Streisand? But the people in our life, the living beings in our life, we need them. Think about as an infant, okay? Babies cannot survive without a close other. And for a long time, I got a 9-year-old. I ain't going anywhere. Okay. She's not ready. She can brush her teeth, but I don't trust her to not set the house on fire yet. So my point being though, we need people and we need them to survive, right? It is not a weakness to need other people. It is not a weakness to need to rely on others. If we do not rely on others, if we did not have somebody to some extent to rely on as an infant, we would not have gotten fed. We would not have had our diaper changed, right? And so the connection we have with trusted others, right? The way our brain and our nervous system and our behavior patterns operate is all based on how we connect and have had trusted others. And it doesn't mean that you can't move through the world. I'm not saying like, oh, if I had difficult relationships early on, or I didn't have reliable sources of co-regulation, that I'm like, a blob. It just is saying how those relationships were experienced and the presence or absence of trusted others is going to have an impact on how you respond to the world, how your nervous system is trained to respond. And having sources of co-regulation, right? Think about what is one of the things, if you have had a child, I will tell you, I was just talking to somebody recently about this. If I see a woman holding a baby or a man holding a baby and going like this, what do I automatically start doing? I start doing this. I do the baby sway, right? What is a mother? What is a father? What is an adult offering to that baby? Co-regulation. The baby is upset, the baby is distressed, and that adult is offering their nervous system to that infant for that infant's nervous system to ground and get enough cues that it's safe. And so being in that state of safety that is reliant or can benefit from co-regulation, it supports health, it supports growth, it supports restoration. Okay. Think about a child in your life and how scary it would be for that child to not have an adult to turn to for something. Food, reassurance, warmth, roof over its head, their head, right? Okay. So what happens if we have a chronic disruption of co-regulation? We can experience difficulties. Maybe we feel it's difficult to feel safe with other people, right? That's why I said like animals can be a lot safer than people. Maybe we feel uncomfortable being close, like physically close to others. We don't like being touched, right? Maybe it's hard to develop trusting relationships. Why do I highlight these things? All of these things come into play in the cancer experience, right? Let's just start with the third one. How much touching have you experienced? How many different people's hands have been on or near you, right? And maybe in very vulnerable situations, partially clothed, unclothed, right? Maybe not a lot of choice. The choice is a false choice. I could do this or not, and I'm not going to treat the cancer, right? Think about what it is to develop trust with your healthcare team, what it's like to walk into a healthcare situation, a hospital system, hospital setting, an infusion room. You're sitting around with other people, depending on the infusion center. If you don't feel real safe around other people, not only are you dealing with the treatment, you're also dealing with all these other people that your nervous system has told you, like, oh, we can't trust these people. And that's not a choice, right? What we can do is we can repair from that. We can be aware of that. It's not like you're left out on an iceberg and like we're gonna, put you out in the direction of the Titanic, right? Because we can heal from that. We can recover from that. We can do things to help our nervous system rebuild after going through traumatic experiences. It's just to acknowledge, like, yeah, wow, like that's going to have an impact on how you experience your cancer diagnosis. So if you find that you struggle alone, you struggle because you're alone or you feel isolated, that is not a personal failure. Right? That is a reflection of something that our system comes pre-wired to need, is other people. Now, there's this other concept within polyvagal theory called hierarchy. And basically that means that there is an order in which our nervous system developed, and that order helps to organize the way in which we respond when we get the cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety. So I mentioned earlier that dorsal vagal pathway, the one that is responsible for our digestion, but can also put us into the protective state of collapse. That is our reptilian brain. That is the part of our autonomic nervous system that we share with reptiles. They have a corollary, right? Turtles have a corollary. Then what came next? Our sympathetic branch. That's the one that's like fight or flight traditionally. Do something, do something, do something. The newest part of the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which is unique to humans, is the ventral vagal pathway. That part of our brain that is wired for social connection. Now, when we think about cues of danger and threat, right, there was just the biological imperative to have a way to respond to a threat in order to literally save our life. If we are out in the Serengeti and there is a lion chasing us, our nervous system better be able to take awareness that we are under danger, and it needs to very quickly decide what it should do, right? But now we have modern threats that use the same system. So the system that our evolutionary predecessors used to keep them safe in caveman days, we have maybe the like 2.0 version, but it is still the same nervous system. There are different threats, right? We have conflict with our partner. We feel left out and isolated from people that are in our social group. We feel othered. Cancer diagnosis, maybe feeling like there's not people that you can relate to around your diagnosis, right? There can be things like accidents. We got financial issues, feeling overworked, lots of things on the to-do list. It's certainly like going into a very small space to have an exam and hearing clinking, 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 and not being able to move for an extended period of time, right? Feeling trapped. So how we respond, right? Our nervous system responds to emotional and social threats the same way it reacts to physical danger. And so now it begs the question of what happens when the cues of danger outweigh the cues of safety. And I like to emphasize cue because classic example is a veteran returns home from war and is sitting outside and hears a car backfire. And what do? Right? Duck and cover. Right? Like or maybe they like get up and they're ready to do something. Because what has their brain paired that sound with? Right? Gunfire, bombs, right? Automatic response. They're not actually under threat, right? The reality, part of it is discernment, right? When we become aware of the responses our nervous system makes on our behalf to keep us safe, and we can notice when that happens sooner, then it allows us to discern in this moment, right now, am I in imminent danger? The cue of danger is the thing that's going to trigger this part of our brain to come online. And hopefully after you leave here, I'll leave you with some things that you can do to build more awareness of your response patterns so that you can bring awareness, and that awareness can then create a pathway to pause and say, am I in danger right now or not? And if the answer is not, then the question is, okay, what can I do to take care of my nervous system right now? That is a question that I talk to my clients all the time, right? Let's shift the problem solving away from whatever your sympathetic nervous system is telling you do. And we're going to replace that with, when you notice this coming on, the problem to solve is, what do I need to do to take care of my nervous system? So let's take 30 seconds here. And I want to invite you to notice, even right in this moment, and we're not trying to change anything. We're just building some awareness, bodily sensation awareness, because our body gives us really important information. Feelings, right? Emotions. Emotions are words we use to describe physiological changes in the body. So if you notice your face and jaw, and you move down to your neck and shoulders, move that down to your chest, your stomach, your lower back, your lower body. And finally, just noticing your breathing. And I'll be honest, I knew the breathing was coming, and I was like, oh, I'm holding my breath right now. I actually just, I just read an article in the New York Times that there is a term called email apnea, which is this known phenomena where while we're reading an email, we hold our breaths, we stop breathing. Okay. So just noticing, like, what information is your body giving you about what state that you're in right now? So remember I talked about that hierarchy, right? We had the like arrow. Now I'm just turning it, right? So now the earliest part of our autonomic nervous system shows up down there, the dorsal, and we go all the way up to ventral, right? We want to spend as much time as possible in ventral, but knowing that on no day do we ever spend the entire day in ventral. We are always moving up and down this ladder. And what we want is flexibility. Regulation, being regulated, is not about being in ventral all the time. Regulation is, do I have flexibility and awareness of my resources to help me move out of a survival state when it is not serving me? And notice here, right, that mobile, I will just, well, I'll get to that in a slide, but notice that the sympathetic and the dorsal, those are survival responses. You are not broken. This is not something that's just happening to you, right? These are predetermined response patterns that were really at heart designed to help us survive and help us keep safe or get to safety. So if you want to take a moment, right, that sympathetic state that we've already kind of talked about, that is the first survival state that our system is primed to shift into. When we're mobilized, overwhelmed, and to just call shallowly into mind. Don't get, I'm going to invite you to have it be like you're looking at the pool rather than jumping into it. To just call to mind a time when you felt like one more thing would push you over the edge, right? I got, all my plates are spinning, and if somebody throws another plate at me, God help them. So that system of mobilization, it gets activated when the world gets too challenging. It is this influx of energy that is saying, do something. And I really like the word mobilization, because fight or flight, sometimes we're not fighting, sometimes we're not running away. And so if we shift to thinking about doing something, sometimes the energy is psychic energy and not physical energy, right? Because people say, I'm so tired, but my mind is racing. Well, you're still in a sympathetic state. It's just all of that mobilization is going mentally into preparing, list making, decide, thinking, going over your list, right? Problem solving, right? It is at core protection through movement. It is an influx of stress hormones. Um, and it can look like alarm. It can make us hypervigilant. Think about energy. Think about emotions that feel like flooded with energy, right? Anxiety, anger, aggravation, right? Being on alert. I'm listening. I'm sitting in the room and I'm waiting to hear, is the doctor coming in? Right. The thing that's challenging is when we move into a survival state, we as humans are built to have a negativity bias. So we over attend to cues of danger, especially when we have moved into a survival state. And that is adaptive, right? Because if we get bit by a poisonous snake and we survive, and that got linked to a rustling in a bush, right? We want to be able to, like, anytime we hear a rustling of a bush, like that could save our life, to like jump back, right? What is on the other side of that is the look on the doctor's face, the tone of voice that the nurse took. What were they really trying to say to me, right? We may also um, overlook cues of safety when we are in a survival state. So, that think about maybe sometimes the miscommunication that you have experienced with your healthcare team, or maybe you've went to an appointment with a loved one and both walked out of there and had a very different emotional experience of the appointment, right? I think the question becomes, where was I on that ladder and where were they on that ladder? Maybe you were more in a position to hear the cues of safety and pick up on the cues of safety while they were in a survival state, or vice versa. It also cuts us off from other people, right? We can't really deeply connect with others when we are in a sympathetic, mobilized state, because our resources are going to trying to figure how to get us to safety or safe enough. Now, that dorsal state, right? That other side of the like digestion system working, when what I want to invite, and I want to be really mindful here of, like, we are sitting in a chair several feet away from the pool and looking at the pool. We are not dipping our toe into the pool. We're just sort of watching it projected. And I say this because we want to keep some distance from getting too connected to that experience that I'm asking you to call to mind, because our brain doesn't always really discern reality from what is being called to mind. So I'm just mindful of not wanting anybody to slip into a dorsal state, right? So that dorsal state, thinking about a time when you felt like you were there, but not really there, right? It's a place of maybe feeling disconnected, fuzzy, not feeling like you have enough energy physically, mentally, emotionally, cognitively. It is the state that we collapse into if we have been in sympathetic mobilization for too long and it has not gotten us to safety, or it is the state we default to because early experiences have taught our nervous system that the safest place to be in unsafety is to shut down. Again, I'm not going to describe scenarios, but to think about people who are chronically in situations they cannot escape, and fighting, doing something is not going to help them, but being as small as possible. What happens is, if dorsal is the go-to survival state, people just fall right through mobilization and may not even notice it because it just happens really quickly. We're really in conservation mode. But what does that end up feeling like? What do we end up experiencing? We feel numb, foggy, untethered. Maybe it's a feeling of hopelessness. We're mentally telling ourselves a story that is filled with despair. It may be difficult to feel hopeful. Hope may feel very much out of reach. Right? And if you think about this mobilization versus immobilization, you know, something that I always think about when we think about resources around dorsal and being in that collapsed state is um, we're in a state that's already collapsed, so we don't want to flood ourselves with energy. If you can relate to being in that dorsal state, in that someplace that you go, um, just being real gentle with yourself when you're trying to get yourself going. I see a lot of people who try to do too much, take on too much. Their loved ones try to shove them out of being in that dorsal state, and that just becomes a cue of danger. Okay, now this is where we want to spend the most time, right? We want to be in that state where everything is okay enough, that we're organized enough to make it through the day, and maybe we can even look ahead a little. This is the state where we can connect to ourselves, others, the world, our sense of spirit. It's where we can be socially engaged. We can both co-regulate with others. We can offer co-regulation and we can self-regulate, right? It is a state of curiosity, of being able to be hopeful, explore options, being compassionate, right? It is a state of resiliency. And you don't need to be in a ventral state, even for a whole day, to be able to experience being in ventral and to reap the benefits of being in ventral. And just keep in mind, these states, that sympathetic and dorsal state are protective, right? Without those response patterns, we would not have survived as a species. Okay, so here we go. Last poll. Which nervous system state do you think you spend the most time in lately? And everybody can define lately for themselves. And maybe you don't identify with one. Maybe you feel like you're climbing up and down that ladder all the time. First answer, there you go. Maybe like this is a newer concept, you know. Maybe it feels foreign, like I don't really know. Um, I will also say typically one of those survival states feels a lot more familiar, and we're much more able to name when we're in one of those two states. We refer to it in the polyvagal world as our home away from home. So like, for instance, sympathetic is my home away from home. I can tell you lots about when I'm feeling mobilized and what that looks like. It took me a much longer to tune into the moments when I was in a dorsal state. And to just acknowledge, like, between the cancer experience, various world events going on, there is a lot of that our systems are being bombarded with. Now, all hope is not lost, even though maybe we feel that way because we've been moving in between states or spending an inordinate amount of time in a survival state, because there are things that we can do. And to just reiterate kind of what I said, right? In a typical day, right? Just a regular old day, we could move up and down, we could get mobilized and then get back to safety and then sink down into despair and then climb our way out of it, right? So it's not just in extreme situations that our nervous system responds this way. This is what it is doing all of the time. Maybe right now it's happening because it's happening a little to me because I'm like, oh God, it's 1:08 and I've got a few more slides and I want to leave time for Q&A. I'm feeling the pressure of time, right? And I will just say, just to name that, because your nervous system could be picking up on that going on in my nervous system through the screen. So what we want to do is try to create experiences, be tapped into resources where we can be under the umbrella of ventral, right? Where the ventral vagal pathway is the one running the show. And it allows us to just savor the home we live in. Our sympathetic branch is just sort of there in the background, monitoring for any dangers, right? It's like the security guard with its feet up on the desk, watching repeats of Seinfeld. And then the dorsal vagal pathway is like taking care of some of those like basic utilities, right? Well, so what do we do? What can we do to create a pathway to become more aware of our nervous system so that we can be more flexible and spend as little time as needed in one of those survival states? And you'll get this slide. You'll get all of the slides, right? The point here is that what can happen is we get into a rigid response pattern. And so when we're in a rigid response pattern, right, we respond to the same cue the same way every time, and we're not noticing it, and we're not aware of that response pattern, and we keep sliding into a survival state, and then maybe we get stuck there, right? We can't figure out how to get out of it, maybe because we don't even realize we're in it, right? What we want is, if we land in a survival state, we want to be able to discern, is this necessary right now? Do I need some of this influx of energy? Do I need to kind of shut down a bit? And when it is time to leave that survival state, can I be flexible enough to find a way to climb back up that ladder? I'm not going to go through all of these right now, but I want to leave you with these slides so that you can think about ways to become more familiar with your nervous system, because that awareness is the first step towards more flexibility. Because we can't resource, we can't shift out of a state if we're not even fully aware of all of the signs. And what I find is people are often good at identifying. What becomes instinctive is to identify their stress responses when they're like deep in the mud of the stress response. And with this mapping, what it allows us to do is to start get more nuanced about some of those earlier signs, so then we can catch it sooner, and it is less of a climb to return to ventral. Another thing that we can do is, once we are mapped and we have a sense of the ways our nervous system responds in those different states, then we can do check-ins, right? To just say, where am I at right now? So like if I check in with myself, like I'm kind of at ventral, I feel some influence of sympathetic. I'm like doing a little like background work on like, you know what, it is what it is. If we go over time, some people will have to hop off, and I'll know better for the next time that I need an hour and a half instead of an hour and 15 minutes, right? But it's allowing ourselves to be curious and non-judgmental, to just notice what's going on in our system. So what are some next steps that you could take, right? So I gave you a couple exercises that you could do on your own. There's certainly clinicians at the center, if you've not taken advantage of our counseling services yet, who are trained in polyvagal theory, that would be able to like work in a more like intense therapeutic environment to work through some of that mapping. I think the other thing is Deb Dana, who is a social worker, who really helped translate this like very dense scientific information that was born out of infants in the NICU, really helped bring it to clinicians in the therapeutic world, to help. She really wanted to better understand. It was a way to help understand the experiences that her clients that had trauma backgrounds were going through. But she has a self-study program. So if you're interested in learning more, she does, I've done training with her. She runs through a lot of exercises that help you really understand your nervous system, so that you have more internal locus of control around a process that is automatic. There's things that we need. Our nervous system needs safety and connection. It needs rest, flexibility, compassion, support. But that awareness is the first step towards regulation. Right? And there are things that we can do that support our nervous system. Connecting with loved ones, resting, deep breathing. I saw some of these things that you see up here were reflected in that slide when I asked you guys, like, what are some things that make you feel safe, right? Maybe you identify with one or more of these things that you instinctively knew support your nervous system. I will say music in particular, because our ventral vagal pathway innervates our auditory system. Music can be really, really, really powerful, actually. And again, we're not trying to be calm all the time. We're really trying to find ways to be flexible and return to that state of connection. And the nervous system provides context to understand our experiences. And we can then increase our awareness. We can increase our insight into our states and what triggers each state. I want to thank you guys for being here. I recognize I'm right at time. Oh my gosh, what did I just do? I want to recognize that, sorry, my nervous system just went bonkers there because I was scrolling through those slides. The last slide just had my email address on it. Like I said, you'll get the slides. I realize we're like right at 1:15 and not everybody may be able to stay for Q&A, but I'm happy to stick around for 10 minutes to open the room and answer questions. But for those of you that were here today, maybe need to hop off, I want to thank you for being interested in learning about your nervous system. And I hope that there are some things that you were able to take away from here that were, if not new information, maybe reinforce some things that you already knew or maybe deepened your understanding to give you some new pathways towards connection.